Hello, everyone. My name is Lyndsey Padget, and I am so honored to be a part of Women Tech Makers Montreal. I am really disappointed that we weren't able to have this in person and I could see all of your beautiful faces. But I hope that you are safe and healthy and relaxing in your comfy clothes at home. So I do really enjoy giving this talk, Badass 101, and I hope that you enjoy it too. All of the links and this presentation as a whole can actually be found at the bit.ly link there. Do take note that bit.ly links are case sensitive. And I'll have those, that URL at the end as well. Okay, so a little about me. I am not speaking French to you right now because my French is really bad. But I am from Kansas City, Missouri, which might explain why I'm not. I work at a company called VMLY&R, which is a digital ad agency that has some major worldwide brands. We do tech for Wendy's, Colgate, Ford, etc. I also have kind of a side thing, getgrit.com. I provide Git consulting and training for organizations. And so that's been, you know, a really rewarding kind of consulting arrangement. And I also have a fun project, femtunes.com. In fact, I was going to have all of these cool swag bags to hand out, so I'm sorry. You can definitely get a hold of me at lyndseypadget.com. You can find all my contact info. And if you're interested in Femtunes, go check it out. It's a playlist, kind of girl power. You know, I will say it's meant more for women than for girls, but I have blog articles and playlists there, and it's just a really fun project. So let me know if you're interested in any Femtune swag, and I can hook you up. Okay, so let's kind of get some disclaimers out of the way. First of all, as you could guess from the title, this talk is not about tech. There are going to be a lot of great tech talks today. But this isn't one of them. And, you know, this is really going to be exploring the human side of being a developer, specifically being a woman in tech, since we're all in that boat. So we're going to be talking about some feelings. And, you know, when I give this talk and it's a room full of men, they start squirming in their seats. But in general, women don't have as big of a problem with this. The other thing that I want to warn you about is that I curse sometimes, and honestly, it's just how I talk, and I normally try to filter myself in certain environments. I don't mean to offend anyone, obviously, but I do want to talk about that because I think words are very important. I have 2 daughters, and we have a rule in our house. We don't use words to make others feel bad about themselves. And so that's the way I view words. I think they're important. And when I use curse words, they are definitely not intended to hurt anyone's feelings or offend anyone. But this talk is a bit more colorful language-wise than my average talks. Also, neither I nor the conference nor my employer are responsible for any kind of rage quits that may occur from this talk. I don't think that's likely, but this talk is really intended to inspire you and reignite the passion that you have for software and for building cool things. And it is not intended to demotivate you in any way. So just know that that is the intent behind it. But, you know, that being said, if it leads you to reassess your situation and feel that you're not in the right place, you know, go get it, girl. There are a lot of opportunities out there for software engineers, and I feel very blessed to be in that situation. Okay, so let's talk about badassery. I did not call this talk How to Be a Badass because I don't think that you can listen to a conference talk for an hour and say, ta-da, I'm a badass, problem solved. You know, badassery is a journey, not a destination. I know that sounds cliche, but it's true. And so sometimes, you know, when I started thinking about this, sometimes it kind of gets conflated or crosses over with personal like branding, right? So one of the things I like to think about is that you have a brand, right? A professional and personal reputation. In fact, personal branding was a term that I never really liked very much because it felt like it was taking the humanity out of being a person. You know, I'm not Pepsi, I'm not Nike, I'm a human being. And so I didn't really like the word brand. I like to just replace the word brand with reputation. Everyone has a reputation, right? It's about putting our best foot forward and carrying ourselves with integrity in all that we say and do, if we can, to try to give off the best version of ourselves. I think that, you know, there's clearly an area where you have to let people decide for themselves. Everyone is going to look at you through their own lens of experience and bias. And that's unfortunate, but that's how it goes. And so the best thing we can do is to try to be aware of how we are perceived, mostly for this talk in the workplace. So this seems obvious, I think, to me, but sometimes we kind of lose sight of it. Also, I'm a big Star Trek fan. Yeah, Trekkie. Software is intended to serve humans, right? We build software to help people. And in fact, that's a core reason why I like building software, is because I like to think about the person that it's helping. Most of the time, the software that we build is not intended for other developers. Even if that's not true, developers are usually a means to an end, right? So let's say I work on a backend API and some other developer consumes that API. The whole point of us both working is to solve some end user's problem. So that's one of the things I love about software. And I think sometimes while it's great that we pursue learning as an industry, sometimes that can shift the focus back to us. We become almost obsessed with learning the next new skill, the new shiny framework that's, you know, about to be released. It's a very competitive field at times, and I think the key is to just remember why we're doing what we do. It's not about using the shiniest framework, because the user doesn't care about that. The user just wants their problem solved. And then the fact that software is built for humans, you kind of have to recognize that it's also built by humans, right? You are a human, in case you've forgotten. And as a human, you have certain requirements. And I find that different people have different strategies around this, but if you really enjoy what you do, and I hope that's the case, it can be hard to figure out where to set boundaries. And if you're working in a place where those boundaries are pushed or threatened, then it's really kind of important to put yourself first and understand what it is you need to do good work. So let's talk about that. This says humanity, deal with it. First of all, recognize that you are an instrument. So you are an instrument to several different kinds of circles in your world. You are an instrument to your family, probably first and foremost, your friends, your coworkers. And if you think about that, the circle there is first your team, and then maybe your department or your organization, and then the company itself. And so think about how your instrumentality is a set of concentric circles, right? But then beyond work and beyond friends and family, you may also have other kinds of social groups that you participate in that you're an instrument to. So this would be religious organizations or you know, athletic groups, you know, things like that. We all are an instrument. We all have a part to play in those circles. your energy is finite, and sometimes I think we have a tendency to deny that or be in denial about that fact. When you are coding something and it's really late and you want to get it finished, it is recognizing your energy being finite that will help you step away. Almost always we know that when we step away from that struggle and we look at it with fresh eyes after being rested, after having a cup of coffee, then we will get better results. And it is sometimes in that moment, it feels like admitting defeat, but it really is the wise thing to do. You have maintenance requirements. So as a human, you have to eat good food, you know, nutrition, you have to have fresh air. You have to visit with friends every once in a while, and I certainly hope that everyone is doing that given the new circumstance. But those are important to both your physical and mental health. Rest is extremely key, at least for me. Getting a full night's sleep really is night and day compared to when I don't. This one is really difficult for a lot of software engineers to come to terms with, but we are all illogical beings. So, you know, sometimes I would joke that I'm half Vulcan, like Spock, but really it's a matter of knowing that while we might be more logical than most of the population, just because of the career path we've chosen, doesn't mean that we are infallible. So understanding that your emotions come into play with your decisions, right? There is a saying called HALT. It's an acronym. So do not make any big or rash decisions when you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. You do not know everything. So even if you are well rested and well fed and you feel that you are being very logical and you're in a good place and something bad happens at work, it's very likely that you don't have all of the information. And most of the emails I have sent, most of the meetings I have called when I was upset about something could have been avoided, or at least I could have avoided some embarrassment if I had taken the time to do all of the research ahead of time to understand what pieces I was missing. It's very likely that you just don't have all of the information. And then finally, life is not fair. Even if we are well rested and well fed and we're being logical and we do have all of the facts and something doesn't go our way, well, sometimes that's just how things go. So, you know, that can be upsetting, obviously, but it also teaches us lessons and builds character, and that's sometimes those struggles turn out to be really good for us in the end. All right, so human exception handling. How do we handle our humanity? First of all, just understanding that list and keeping it in mind. Some people might call that mindfulness, but really just being attuned to your own mental and physical state as you are working is extremely helpful. And then if you can also try to see that in others, I think it's really, that's what we refer to as emotional intelligence, right? I think that, you know, people can give you a lot of cues with their body language, with their tone of voice. And, you know, if you're interacting with a coworker and you realize that you or the other person is not in a position to have the conversation right that moment, schedule it for another time. I think, yeah, being sensitive to those needs is just first step. So I like this slide. It gives me a lot of feels, but partially because there are a lot of gender undertones in this. As you might remember, League of Their Own, there's no crying in baseball. And yes, I have cried at work. mostly in the bathroom, I would say. But I really like the quote from Tina Fey's Bossy Pants. She says, you should cry at work. It terrifies people. So I do think that we should be working in environments that trust us as adults. So I find that it's not necessary to overshare. So I'll tell you a quick story. I had a babysitter who was watching the kids for the summer, and she was supposed to arrive at 8 a.m. so that I could get to work by 9 or what have you. And she called me at about 7:30 one morning and said, I won't be able to come in today. And I said, oh, okay. You know, I'm on the phone, and my brain starts immediately going into what am I going to do? You know, damage control, right? And so she continued on. She said, yeah, you know, my dog, I was up all night with my dog Spike. He's really had a lot of veterinary issues. I've taken him to the vet, and, you know, we had him on this chicken diet for a while, but that's really not working. So they might think that he has some kind of kidney problem. So we switched to lamb food. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, don't care. Yeah. That was a case of oversharing. And all she had to say, honestly, was, I have a personal situation that I need to take care of. That's it. You don't have to over-explain. And, you know, I find that people do this a lot in the workplace, especially if they are new or they're nervous, or if the culture of the workplace requires that. Again, I don't think that that is a very healthy workplace situation. So if I worked in a place where they required that level of detail, I just don't think it would be the right place for me. So the other thing I'll say about this is that in that story, the longer she talked about her dog, the less honest I thought she was being. You know, the more it seemed like a lie. So just think about that, and think about the appropriateness of the information as well. That was obviously not the time or place to be telling me all of that detail. But later, you know, if she said, I can't come in today, my dog is sick. Okay, cool. I mean, you know, puts me in a difficult spot, but that's fine. And then later, if I said, how is your dog doing? Then clearly that's a point where I care, and we can talk about your dog. So, okay. So let's talk about duck typing. Raise your hand. No one can see you. I mean, it doesn't matter. Raise your hand if you know what duck typing is in programming. If you have heard of that term, it refers to the old mantra of walks like a duck, talks like a duck, must be a duck. And in programming, you use it to do behavior detection on an object. When you pass an object into a function, you try to see, is it a duck, right? What type of object is this? So I like to apply duck typing to people as well. When do we fit in? When do we stand out? I think that's the key here, because I like this image because we're all ducks in this picture, right? None of these ducks is a hippopotamus. That would clearly not fit in, right? I think your workplace should feel this way. Your workplace should be an environment where we are all kind of the same, and yet also have the agency and the freedom to just express ourselves and be ourselves. You know, again, I wouldn't want to work in an environment where I felt like my true self was stifled. So I think that's really important. I think thinking about how to stand out in the right ways, and really be like taking action on that, not just sitting back and thinking, oh, I would like to be known for this at my company, but oh well, you know, really just recognizing what it is you want to stand out for within your own company, and be that unique duck. But at the end of the day, we should all kind of feel like we're in an environment where we're like our coworkers as well. Okay, so this is an example. I have changed the name of this LinkedIn profile to protect the innocent. I was working with someone. It was actually at VMLY&R several years ago, and at the time it was just called VML. So I took a screenshot of this because I thought it was an interesting case. John Smith, again, I've changed the name. He was working on my team, and he was very ambitious. Several times in our one-on-ones, he would say, you know, I really want to be a manager. I really want to have lead responsibilities. And yet, of all of the developers, John Smith didn't perform as far as, you know, the amount of code and stories that he was getting done. In fact, he was near the bottom as far as performance goes. So I was just very confused by this situation. I couldn't really understand the difference between what he was, what I saw, and what he thought of himself to be, right? So I think it's critical that if we're calling ourselves, for example, a full stack developer, well, what does that mean, right? It means I do databases, back-end development, front-end development, and CSS, and probably some kind of precompiled version of CSS, right? Like full stack developer means something. A database administrator means something. Let's really make sure that our the title we are putting out to the world matches up with what we are doing. And that was not the case for John Smith here. So I went out to John Smith's LinkedIn profile, and I understand LinkedIn is just one of many ways that we can put that professional reputation out into the world. That being said, it's really one of the, it's a very important piece, I think. So if you don't have a LinkedIn profile and you don't want to do some of the things I'm mentioning here, no problem. But again, it's about perception. And in this particular case, I think it would have been better if John Smith had not had a LinkedIn profile at all. But what I see here is a couple of things. First, you'll note that John Smith's title is contractor. Now, John Smith was actually working on some web code, so he could have said web developer or computer programmer or, you know, front-end developer, something like that. There are a lot of titles that we can use for programming, and I don't think that it matters all that much what they are. But I think John Smith chose one that was not only vague, but also really more like a payment arrangement, right? So to give you some context, at VMLY&R, we have contractors and we have full-time employees. Contractors typically stay for a year or more before they may be converted to full-time. So contractor doesn't matter, you know? He actually asked about this and said, well, I wasn't sure if it was appropriate to say that I worked for VML. And I was like, yeah, man, there's no LinkedIn police. Like, no one's gonna arrest you. It's really fine. Incidentally, I've had a website where I've had company logos for over 10 years. And not one time did I ask any of those companies if I could use their logos. It was because I had worked with them in the past. And only one situation in 10 years I had the CEO of a small company contact me and say, hey, why is our logo on your website? And I said, well, I did write blog articles for you guys for like 3 years. And he was like, oh, carry on. So, you know, if that's the worst that happens, I would say maybe the worst that would really happen is somebody would ask you to take it off, right? If somebody had an issue, they'll let you know. But that's more of a ask permission, or ask forgiveness, not permission. So anyway, back to John Smith here. Aside from the fact that he's a contractor, which tells me absolutely nothing, his employer is listed as Tech Systems, which is a very fine recruiting firm in Kansas City. So it just isn't clear what it is that he does. Besides that, there is no photo of John Smith, which again, technically fine. I understand that not everyone wants to have a photo on their LinkedIn profile, but in that case, you may want to have an avatar or a picture of something that you like, something that represents you as a person. If you like nature, maybe it's pictures of mountains or something like that. And that's a great talking point if you run into someone or go to a job interview, they could ask you about that. A couple of other things, there's no description here at all. And there are 91 connections, which I think, my grandma's been retired for about 20 years. She has more than 91 connections. It's really easy to make connections on LinkedIn. So the assessment here, after I see John Smith's LinkedIn profile, the conclusion that I draw is that John Smith does not care. And when I align that with the lack of effort that he was putting in at work, everything he said about wanting to be in a lead position no longer mattered, because it was pretty clear what kind of duck he was at that point. He was a lazy duck. So I thought, let's do a hypothetical exercise here to actually put some effort into this profile. What would it look like if John Smith actually cared? Well, now we see handsome stock photo guy. Yeah, great. Now I know what John Smith looks like. Okay. John Smith is an application developer. Where? Oh, at VML. Okay, great. I didn't put a description here because of the space, but that would be highly encouraged, obviously. You can put description, you can put media, images I have found are really, really a nice addition to your LinkedIn profile, and you can do redacted versions of like a screenshot of a project you've worked on in the past, or if you've been on some kind of networking event, or you've been in a group, you could take a picture of that, or find one from social media. That's really good context for somebody who comes here. And then finally, you'll see 395 connections. I mean, all John Smith had to do was reach out to like 3 recruiters, and that happened overnight. Amazing. All right, so let's talk about a-hole versus badass, because there's a pretty fine line here. And I think sometimes the word badass gives people pause, and they think, well, I don't want to be an a-hole. And I understand that concern. So I want to draw the line between these two and talk about what makes someone an a-hole, what makes someone a badass. An a-hole talks a lot, and a badass mostly listens. An a-hole complains, and a badass seeks solutions. An a-hole grumbles, and a badass voices concerns appropriately. An a-hole interrupts, and a badass controls the floor. This one is really near and dear to my heart. I hate being interrupted. It is just one of my pet peeves. So I have some strategies. If anyone is going through this, I would recommend the following. If you are speaking, and I'm gonna use the example that maybe we're in a meeting room or something, right? So we're in a meeting and there are 6 or 8 people or something, and someone interrupts you. I like to put the finger up, this finger, not the other finger, don't do that. Kindergarten move, like, oh, you don't have to say anything. You can just put this finger up and continue talking. If the person continues talking after that point, I actually move to talk to the hand, and then I will actually say something. I'll say something like, I wasn't finished yet, but you'll have your chance, just 1 second. Or, just let me finish this thought, and then I'd love to hear what you have to say. You want to make it clear that we are peers, we're on equal ground. Even if that person is your manager, interrupting is not okay. So you have to set this boundary and make it very crystal clear at that point that the interruption is not going to be allowed. Now, I say that, but occasionally, very rarely, actually, people will continue talking. So even if they didn't get the hint when you did this, most people got the hint at this point. And remember, we're in a room full of people, right? So if I've put this hand up and I've said something like, you'll have your turn in a minute, you know, or I wasn't finished yet, it makes it crystal clear to everyone in the room that you're interrupting me. So let's say, though, that they are really fired up and they did not heed your warning. And at this point, they're probably also raising their voice. At this point, I put my hand down and I just give them the stink eye. I realized that might seem like letting them win, but you have to consider the alternatives. Really, the only option at that point is to raise your voice higher than theirs, and now you're in a shouting match, and you've let them take you down to their level. That's something I don't allow people to do. So the other thing is, really at that point, everyone in the room understands what has just happened. They know that that person interrupted you, and especially if you follow this pattern multiple times, then they'll start to get the hint and they'll say, wow, that person interrupts a lot. And hopefully it's a bad habit for them and they do it equally. It's not targeted at you. If it is, that's something you need to talk to them or your HR / manager about. Okay, so moving on. An a-hole is self-centered. A badass understands his or her instrumentality. An a-hole is complacent, and a badass is tenacious. An a-hole fights for his or her own needs, and a badass fights for the needs of the team. An a-hole makes excuses, and a badass admits fault. An a-hole flakes out, and a badass follows through. An a-hole commits on behalf of others, and a badass only commits for themselves. Who here has ever had someone commit on their behalf? That sucked, right? If you get to a point where you are being asked to commit on someone else's behalf, don't. You can say something like, you know, I think it might be possible for the team to have that done by Friday, but I'm really going to have to check with them. Please don't take my word for that yet. Let me check first. So you can hint and say, you know, maybe I'll have to get back to you. That's an okay answer. An a-hole trusts no one, and a badass trusts but verifies. An a-hole procrastinates, and a badass makes a plan. An a-hole puts others down, and a badass lifts others up, mostly just by setting a good example. An a-hole gossips, and a badass remains focused. An a-hole expects others to carve a path for them, and a badass continually improves and grows no matter what. This is another one that is important to me. I do not think that it's the company's responsibility to lay out a path for success. I think it's nice if they offer one, and I consider that when I join a company or as I'm moving up throughout my my career. But I also want to work in a place where I have flexibility and freedom to grow in the way I want to grow. And I hope and expect that there will be some overlap there so that the way I want to grow and the way they want me to grow are mostly in sync. And there will always be those outlying pieces that don't overlap, and that's okay. But having the accountability to improve and grow and not make that the company's problem or the company's job for me, I think is really key to success and happiness. All right, so now let's talk about this image. Again, I've given this talk before, and it's mostly to an audience of a slightly more modern version of this guy. Unfortunately, for most of the world, still, when we say that we are computer programmers, this is what they picture. It is a stereotype, obviously, and I sense that none of us, no one dislikes this stereotype more than us, right? Because you know, if you've ever shown up to a meetup event or some kind of programming group and they mistake you for the recruiter, you understand, right? Hopefully that's never happened to you. It has happened to me. So I don't like this stereotype. I don't think anybody does. And part of it is around the way that we present ourselves. You know, unfortunately, there are still a lot of developers in our industry that look like they just rolled out of bed and came into work. And, you know, basic hygiene, super important. But beyond that, I think it's more about owning the look. So I like these images because they are a fresh take on an old idea. And I want you to think about who this person might represent. So I'm going to give you a minute. And some of you might be screaming at your screens right now or typing in Slack, oh, I know who it is. And if you guessed Santa Claus, you're correct. This is Saint Nick. And, you know, you got to say, Santa looks good. Santa in these images here has taken his classic appearance and freshened it and kind of tightened it up, right? This is actually an ad for a fancy mall, the Yorkdale Fashion Mall. I think Toronto is where it is. But yeah, some of you may be familiar with it. Every year they hire a male model to play Santa, and it's weird. Like, there are more women in the line to sit on Santa's lap than kids. I don't know, strange. Anyway, Santa has it going on, and Santa doesn't mess around either. You know, he's got places to be, and he doesn't have time for your bullshit. So yes, I understand that it's easy to look like a badass when you have a $4,000 leather jacket on, but it really doesn't require that. All it really requires is to think about the look that you are trying to present to the world, and then like go for it full throttle. Own the look. So I tell people, you know, everyone has a different idea or image that they want to portray for themselves. And for some people, that is, you know, polo shirt, tucked in, khakis, with a belt, right? Totally fine. For other people, it's tattoo sleeves and black t-shirt and big hoop earrings, and that's fine too, right? I try to look for me, you know, in a way that I wouldn't be embarrassed if a client or the CEO wanted to have a meeting all of a sudden. So, you know, I guess business casual is what my look is. And I'm certainly not the world's greatest fashionista, but I do try to think about how I will be perceived with respect to my clothes, hair, etc. And, you know, I want to be myself, and I want to work in an environment where I can do that. And so that's a big factor. Like, you know, I would have to see the workplace and see how everyone dresses and the culture before I would feel comfortable accepting a job offer, for example. So yeah, I think it's key that we just kind of think about the look that we want to do and just really go for it. Incidentally, this is last year's Yorkdale Fashion Santa. He's much more Fabio-like, I think. All right, so a badass puts number one first. We talked about this. We talked about meeting your own requirements before you can really help your team. Remember all of those concentric circles that you're a part of, your team, your organization, your company. And we can't help them if we don't take care of our own needs first. So this is often referred to as the oxygen mask principle. You can't help anyone else until you consider and meet your own needs. A badass also commands respect, but also smiles. So there's this book called No One Understands You and What to Do About It by Heidi Grant Halverson. And she refers to this dynamic of being respected and liked. She calls it competency and warmth. Competency and warmth, you see? And by the way, I scoured the internet to find the one image of Chuck Norris's teeth. So you're welcome. This, I feel like, is, it's that magic combination of being liked, being respected, and hopefully you feel that way about your coworkers, or at least most of them. Everybody's got a few that kind of grate on our nerves. But again, you're not working in the right place if you feel like everyone is competent but not warm, or everyone is warm but not competent. Like that's an imbalance, and I think we should try to strive to meet both of them. That doesn't mean you have to smile all the time, especially at a women's conference. I understand, like, oh, just smile more. That's like the most sexist thing ever. But I do think that Heidi Grant Halverson's observation about competency and warmth is spot on. Okay, so a badass is also radically candid. This is, it was a talk, and it was turned into a book by Kim Scott called Radical Candor. And she developed this quadrant system where on the y-axis you care about people personally, and on the x-axis you challenge them. So radical candor is the quadrant that you want to be in. You care about them, so you have that warmth, and then you also challenge them, so you are competent. You can see how these ideas are kind of similar, right? If you care about someone, but you don't challenge them, that's ruinous empathy. If you challenge them, but don't care about them, then that's obnoxious aggression. I don't know about you, but every development team I've ever worked on has at least one person in that category. This is the person that just wants to be right all the time. They like to argue. Manipulative insincerity is obviously the least desirable quadrant, where you neither care about someone personally or challenge them directly. Okay, so this is a great book that just happens to coincide slightly with the title of this talk, called You Are a Badass. So sort of discovering your own inner badass, by Jen Sincero. She is fantastic. I love this book. I want to share with you an audio clip, and hopefully it comes through okay. But this is where she is referring to the fact that a badass makes a decision. Badasses don't waffle. They don't dilly-dally. They identify what is important to them, and then they go after it. And I know this sounds really easy, and it's harder to do, but this is kind of her framing for that. Just a little bit of context. She was just talking in this part of the book about Henry Ford and how he was not educated and some of the crazy ideas that he had. So let's listen to this clip by Jen Sincero's You Are a Badass.
This is what it means to make a decision for reals. When you make a no-nonsense decision, you sign up fully and keep moving towards your goal regardless of what's flung in your path. And stuff will most definitely get flung, which is why making the decision is so crucial. This shit is not for sissies. The moment it gets hard or expensive or puts you at risk of looking like a moron, if you haven't made the decision, you will quit. If it wasn't uncomfortable, everyone would be out there all in love with their fabulous lives. So often we pretend we've made a decision when what we've really done is signed up to try until it gets too uncomfortable. Henry Ford didn't even make it past the 6th grade, and there he was, bossing around a bunch of the world's biggest engineering smarty pantses, setting himself up to look like a total idiot by spending large amounts of money and time on the proven impossible. Ford was determined, and he trusted his gut and his vision more than the small thinking of others. He'd made the decision that he would have his engine the way he would have it, and nothing was going to stop him. This is why the decision is so important. If you had an idea and had to go up against a room full of people who quote unquote knew better than you did and demand they do what you say in spite of all the proof they had against you, would you stick to your guns? Or if you needed tens of thousands of dollars to start your new business, and the only person you could think of to ask was your scary, rich uncle who never remembered who you were even though you saw him every Christmas, Would you ask him for it? Or if you were sick of feeling fat and unsexy and out of shape, and the only time you could make it to the gym was at 5 a.m. on freezing winter mornings when you were all snugly in bed, would you go? If you made the decision that you were going to reach your goals, you would do whatever it took. If you merely wanted to, but hadn't made the firm decision to, you'd roll over and begin convincing yourself that your life is fine just the way it is.
Wow. That was a driveway moment for me. I do a lot of books through Audible or, some kind of books on audiobooks. So yeah, that one really got to me, and it really resonated with me because it just so happened that at the time I was trying to wake up in the morning and go to the gym, which is something I used to be able to do and has become increasingly harder as I've gotten older. Or maybe just because of my family or work or other schedule changes. And I was beating myself up about it. And the interesting thing about this quote, I think, is I've actually had people give me feedback to say that it sounds very inflexible, that Jen Sincero is perhaps implying that if you're not meeting your goals, it's because it wasn't prioritized enough, which I think is kind of true, but also just that you're not trying hard enough, which is not true. I don't think that that's what she's saying. I think if you have set a goal and it really is a decision to do it, it isn't just the trying that she was referring to, then you will find a way. So it wasn't part of the requirement for me to work out at 6 a.m., but it was part of the goal or the decision to get in shape, right? So, and even that is not a SMART goal. Hopefully you all know what SMART goals are. It's an acronym, you can Google it. But having those goals set and then finding a way to reach them, and if one way doesn't work, it's okay. That's how you learn what works for you and what doesn't, so you can take a step back and try again, as opposed to just giving up, right? There is a great classic book. Unfortunately, it's a bit outdated as far as, just for the modern times, but it's called The Magic of Thinking Big. And he refers to the fact that if you leave your house to go to a destination and you're driving your car to the destination and the road is closed, you don't give up and go home. You find another route. You find another way to get to where you're trying to go. And that's how it should be for us in our careers and in our lives. Now, this one was really hard for me. I spent years trying and successfully breaking myself of this habit, which is saying sorry too much. It has been proven at this point that women struggle with this problem more than others, so more than men specifically. So we say, I'm sorry, or we apologize in some way more than men on average. And it was something that I did often, mostly because I was late a lot. And I'm not going to lie and say that I have solved that problem. I've gotten better about being on time for things, but really it's a matter of just reprogramming our brains, and it changes the dynamic of the conversation. If you want to say thank you for your patience, don't say sorry, I'm always late. And that was, that resonated with me. Coming into a meeting late, I would immediately start saying, oh, sorry, as I kind of shuffled and got in my seat. And it just wasn't the way I wanted to be portrayed. So I had to reprogram myself to say, thank you for your patience. So don't say, sorry, I'm not making a lot of sense. You should replace that with thank you for understanding me. If you just replace sorry with thank you, it can really go a long way. And by the way, these little cartoons are by an artist named Yao Zhao, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. She has this little character called Bao Pu on Twitter, so you can click those links in the online version of this talk. Okay, a couple more things. A badass diligently manages their time. This is a system that has worked for me for many, many years. It's called an Eisenhower Matrix, named after President Eisenhower. And I know other famous leaders have used it as well. Again, it's a quadrant system. As you can see, on the y-axis, we have important and not important. And on the x-axis, we have urgent and not urgent. I color code things on my note-taking system. I use Google Keep. So if something is important and urgent, it's red. If something is not important and not urgent, it's green. And then the other two categories are orange and yellow. I will say, like, the hardest part of using this system is figuring out what to do with those orange and yellow sections, the important but not urgent and not important but urgent. Delegation can be a useful strategy. Setting deadlines for yourself that are in the far in the future to get to those things that are important but not urgent, etc. So you can find what works for you. But one of the things that I think is great about Google Keep is that it keeps my notes in the order that I created them. And as I scroll down in my list, I find older and older notes. Well, as I go from the top to the bottom, I see red at the top. I see orange, yellow kind of mixed in. And then as I scroll further and further, I see green, all green. And at first it was a bit depressing because I thought, well, I'm not getting everything done, but you have to recognize that you're never going to be done with everything you want to get done. I mean, your list will never be completed. And the best way we can do it is to make sure that the things that are important to us are getting done. Important to us, or maybe important to others, whether boss deadlines or tax deadlines or things that have to be done. But if something is not important and not urgent, for me that's the green category, then that's okay. That's where those things belong, in the I might never do this bucket. And that's not the decision that Jen Sincero was talking about. That's the I might do this someday if I feel like it. And it gave me, thinking of it that way, gave me more freedom and less guilt about not getting everything on my list completed. Stop starting and start finishing is an old agile mantra. This has to do with, or agile or kanban, I guess, kind of depends on what you use, but it's about throughput, right? So don't start 10 projects because you'll have 10 not finished projects. Try to complete one project at a time, or perhaps one kind of project at a time, and limit your throughput to something like that. Everybody's got a different system for this, but just being mindful of how many things you take on and understanding that it is okay to say no. So, recapping, a badass is not mean. A badass is not rude. A badass is not a robot. You can have feelings. In fact, it's highly encouraged. A badass is not rich. Again, $4,000 leather jacket. I mean, that's pretty cool. I'm not going to lie, but it's not a requirement. A badass is not popular. And a badass is not a manager. It doesn't require any kind of title to be a badass. That's one of the greatest things about it, is that we can just carry ourselves with more integrity and be more mindful of our boundaries. And that doesn't take any major shift in our lives. We can start that today. Finally, this is a complete sentence. If someone comes to you on Friday afternoon and it's 3 o'clock and there's a demo on Monday and they say, hey, I know it's kind of late notice, but we were wondering if you could, work on these issues and maybe have it ready for a demo on Monday because the client's going to be here. I'm going to say no. I like to let that linger for a minute. I like to kind of let it sit in so that they understand I'm not going to say anything else. It also gives them time to reflect on how stupid their their ask was, right? So no is a complete sentence. On the other hand, you don't want to be the person that isn't helpful, the person that says, you know, get out of here. You want to be as helpful as possible without violating your boundaries, without, in this case, working all weekend to fix some defects for a demo or something. So you can propose a solution. You can say, no, but I might be able to have all of it done by Tuesday afternoon. Will the client still be in town then? Could you have the demo at that point? You would be surprised how often the answer on the other side is yes. If you give someone a workable solution, and one of the tips from Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek is to say, does that sound reasonable? Which makes it really hard to argue with what you just said. Then you would be surprised at the number of times that that is totally satisfactory and means that in this case, you don't have to work all weekend. But let's say you offered that solution and it wasn't acceptable. You could say, you know, you should talk to Jimmy, the intern, because he would be really excited for that opportunity. You know, you can help that person find a solution to their problem without making it your problem. When you say no to others, as hard as that may be, understand that you are also saying yes to yourself. You are saying yes to yourself, the people that you care about, and the causes that you care about, all of those circles that you belong to, even outside of work. So try to keep that in mind. Now you have everything you need to go and be awesome, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference today. Again, I'm sorry I wasn't able to meet you in person, but I will be available for some questions at this point. So thank you very much.